Yeah. We can chat. Okay. For any of you who don't know who this is NonY, an old friend of mine, one of the best Brood War players ever outside of Korea, was a pro gamer. You know, I mean, his accolades are many. Some people, they might remember Hydra canceling a command center. That's probably his most glorious moment. The Courage video, where he went to the finals of Courage on his first attempt in Korea. Many other things as well. Probably one of the smartest StarCraft players that we've ever had in the foreign scene, and the fastest as well. A great runner. There's many great things about him. But yeah, the one person I always think about, I'm like, if I had known his brain and my work ethic, man, nothing would have stopped us if we could have done an Archon dance.
It's absolutely true. Well, your brain is good, dude. I've always loved the way you thought about the game, but your mechanics just never seem to get quite to the pro gamer level. I'm already spitting truth bombs as fast and hard as I can.
Fuck yeah. But I'm sure the chat is completely agreeing with you on that one.
Well, if you had the mechanics of a pro gamer, dude, I would have loved to see it.
Me too. I'm still working towards it. We'll see one day. Maybe that by the time I'm 50.
You're gonna live long enough for an RTS to come out that's not as mechanically demanding, and you're gonna be the best player in the world. So let's talk about StormGate, right?
Yeah, there you go. Oh my god, perfect.
The best segue ever.
Perfect segue right there. So yeah, we're here today to talk about StormGate. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously you must have played a bunch of the like, what was it? It was a closed beta, I guess they call it. Or no, it was actually an open beta for a little bit. But anyways, it was a beta that was up, only a couple races in it. But how much did you play? Did you play a whole lot? Have you been like following it? What have you like, just general overview before we talk about the actual game?
I mean, I would say I played a lot. I didn't play a ton, and I didn't play the whole phase, but like I played enough to get to be playing the top players on the ladder, right? And to at least feel like I can have a conversation with all the best players and kind of understand the game on that level. So, but then I'm a family man now, so I couldn't grind day in, day out every single day. And then after the tournament happened, some people were hardcore and were like, I'm gonna keep like trying to get as good as I can at this game until that phase shuts down, right? But there was nothing to play for, and the meta kind of got pretty wonky, and everyone knew there wasn't going to be another update coming. But so I didn't play during all that. I was like, this is kind of pointless now. But
yeah,
I played enough to feel like I can talk about the game at the highest level.
Yeah. I actually did basically the same thing. I played a whole bunch before that tournament, and I felt like really ready to cast it. I didn't play in it or anything, but yeah, after that, it felt kind of pointless. And especially when they put that map, Jagged Maw, in, I was like, well, that's the worst RTS map I've ever played in my entire life. I've never, which race did you end up playing the most? Do you like one that you prefer? Infernal. Okay, well then you didn't feel the pain of a Vanguard player trying to play against Infernal on that map. Oh my god, the catapults come so quick. Your towers don't do anything. It's terrible.
Yeah. But it's fun to play a new game, right?
Yeah.
Even when you're the victim, it's pretty fun to be figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's my mentality. That's my MO for 26 years now, is being the victim race. So it fit me perfectly.
Yeah.
That's why I had to switch. I started as Infernals. I was like, no, this is too strong. Yeah. We gotta find something a bit weaker.
Yeah. No Terran Bonchois. No, just nobody, no one to look up to. No one ever, not even a single Terran championship in all of Brood War's history. It's like, it's crazy. It's so hard.
Well, I mean, You already know the answers to this. You know that they're smarter and better, harder working than the other race players. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit what you actually what your impressions of the game are. What are you thinking about it so far?
I mean, to immediately just get a little meta about the whole thing, it's like I started to immediately get annoyed by people who were super negative, and also. But not just like, it's like, I hate all the toxicity and negativity on the internet. But it was like people who didn't have an open mind, or just weren't like creative enough to like think how certain things could work. So it's like they're trying to do things, and people are saying like, that's never going to work because of XYZ. And I'm just like, bro, like, I can immediately think of like 10 ways that, this could work.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it might not work, but it's like, so I try to just be more positive and just think of how things could work, like gameplay wise, like design wise.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I was like, okay, now I'm just not totally sure that all their decisions and like vision are exactly what I think are good ideas, and then I'm not sure
Okay.
how much they're willing to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I don't know if you've seen, you know, their financial situation has come more to light recently, and so I think they're going to be in a little bit of a rush to generate revenue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I don't know. They probably maybe were hoping for a longer time to experiment with things and develop
Mm-hmm.
the game before they had to be profitable, basically, right? And so I don't know if that will affect them or not, or if they still feel really good. But all having said all that,
Mm-hmm.
they if you want to make another RTS that's like StarCraft or like StarCraft 2, really, it's, we've gotten pretty far away from Brood War, but in the lineage of Brood War, but similar to StarCraft 2, I think they've achieved that, and I don't think that's easy to do. So like they're starting from a really good spot, right? But then it's like, what do we change about StarCraft 2? And like, what do we add? What do we take away? Like, how do we actually make a better game? How do we make the quote unquote sequel better?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I'm like, I'm not sure about all their decisions. Hold on, I just got to
Yep.
grab a hoodie because I'm
Yeah.
just getting cold.
Go ahead. I don't know, guys. It looks pretty hot to me. Oh man. We'll just wait.
So one
All right.
thing I'd love to. Oh, sorry, did I just interrupt you? I
No, no,
started
no.
talking before you
I was I didn't know that you were going to start talking right away. So I'm used to talking to
I'm
people
like,
who don't know how to speak.
yeah.
So I'm like, all right. So
Okay,
let me
yeah.
just ask you about what you were just about to say. Okay, no, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So let's get into specifics, and then I
Mhm.
want to hear you start talking
Oh, of
because like
course.
that's why I'm here instead of just like making a video, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like let's talk about upgrades. So they're
Mm-hmm.
against +1, +2,
Yes.
+3 type upgrades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've actually so I'm really for them. And so here's why I started to care about them a lot. At
Okay.
first I was like, okay, you guys removed them. I don't think that's necessarily a big problem. And then this is what I saw last phase. When you get ahead in Stormgate, and note the game's going to change a lot every single phase.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all we can do is talk about what we've seen so far. But when you get ahead in Stormgate, it's not the way you can get more ahead is only by expanding your economy. That's the way it feels to me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So in StarCraft, you might start your upgrades earlier, right? So you have like a plan of like, I'm going to get more ahead in this way. I'm going to get more ahead in this way. So it might be investing in tech,
Mm-hmm.
might be investing in upgrades. It might be getting expansion. You have all these options and there's tension there between the choices, right? And with Stormgate, it just felt really well. We didn't have tier 3 tech. So that tension isn't there at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like do I start going toward tier 3 and getting like the highest tech stuff, or do I expand? And it's like you had to expand because tier 3 isn't implemented yet. But upgrades, I think, are another thing that's really important of saying, they build on each other. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a long-term thing. If you want to get 2-2 first, you have to get 1-1. Same with 3-3. And they're expensive. They're usually require building that you wouldn't otherwise make. And yeah, it costs gas, and which in Stormgate that would be Therium. And it's supposed to be something that is, yeah, it's an investment, right? It's a way to get more ahead. And so when I talk to people like saying, oh, I want upgrades back, people are like, there's so many excuses, like so many things they don't like about them, and I'm like, if you keep an open mind, like I think we could find a solution. So a lot of people hate that they forget to get them,
Hmm.
right? They hate that they have to get them.
Okay.
Like, right? Like if the game goes on long enough, you can't be 0-0.
Yeah.
Everybody has to, like, unless you're doing it all in, you have to get them, right? And so I don't know, all this stuff came up, and I'm just like, none of this sounds to me like like nothing I ever heard was like an insurmountable problem. I'm
Hmm.
like, if you forget to get them, let's just put them on the UI. Like we can give you reminders.
Sure.
Like the game can do whatever it wants. We can make it really easy so that the reason you're not getting them is never because you forgot. Like it could be right there,
Hmm.
right? And so something like that. And so I'd like to hear if you think the new generation of RTSs should have. Let's forget that they're just boring +1 plus. This
Yeah.
unit does more damage. This unit takes less damage.
Hmm.
Let's forget about that. But when we're talking about, let's combine like research and upgrades into the same thing of like you're building a building, you're telling that building to make your units better somehow.
Hmm.
Do you think we have to have some that are cheaper and quicker and some that are more expensive and take a lot longer? Or do you think we can do away with ones that are more expensive and take a lot longer? Because to me, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I found out that they didn't want upgrades quite a
Mm-hmm.
while ago. And I was actually talking to Monk about it just a little bit in Atlanta for that show match that Tasis and I ended up casting. And it kind of like caught me off guard when I realized when I was playing in like that original alpha or whatever and saw like, wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute, there's like literally no upgrades here. And I just
Yeah.
I kind of assumed and talked to them, and they did, Monk at least did let me know that the idea is more towards, well, this is the feeling I got from him at least, is that the idea
Mm-hmm.
of no upgrades is more towards uh being more free to switch around your tech and what you're making, right? So like for instance, let's say that you're playing a tough game right now, and you're if you're both 2-2, let's say, it doesn't even matter what it is. If you're both 2-2, you can't suddenly switch into other units because the game isn't made right if the 2-2 worse units aren't going to be the brand new units that you're bringing out, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was the feeling I got from them as to the main reason why
Mm-hmm.
they're doing this is so that there is more like strategic variation is what I
Right.
would like to say that they think that is. Okay.
Yeah.
So if that's the idea, is it gives you more strategic variation because you're skipping out on upgrades, so thus you can switch around your tech a bit more. The thing is, I think that actually, yes, you can switch your tech a little bit more. You do have to be really careful about the overall power level of units in this case, of course, because it's like, well, a lot of things are countered in StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2 by having strong upgrades, where it's like, well, you could go for this
Mm-hmm.
really strong endgame unit like the carrier, but if you have 0-0 on it and I have +3 attack, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So that's like another thing you have to maybe plan ahead and start your upgrades way before you even want to transition into something like that. And I would actually argue that is actually adding more strategy in a lot of ways. If you look at all the different ways that we use upgrades, they provide tension in the game. As you're waiting for them to finish or you're trying to hit certain timings. They just like the fact that you're investing money into that, right? So it's like, it's not just expanding, macroing, and teching. It's also upgrading, right? So you can actually cut some of these out and choose which ones you want to do and put them together.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I mean, look at StarCraft 1. Like StarCraft 1 is so straightforward. And this StarCraft 2 in the beginning with the double forge builds with Protoss and stuff, right? Some of these are really straightforward where it's like, yeah, you get like 3 upgrades or so. And it's like, now you're hitting like a power spike level. It's really interesting. You have all these different things that you can do with that. So, I mean, I'm always a fan of upgrades. I just think it feels good too. Just playing, like I do a fair amount of like cheesy free for alls with the guys in the chat and stuff, and it just
Mm-hmm.
feels good as I get those additional upgrades. If I'm on like 2-2 mutalisks flying around, I'm like, oh yeah, like this feels so different when I'm flying around as opposed to the 0-0, which is kind of is always the same. Like you're
Yeah.
making a unit at the beginning of the game and at the end of the game. Like as soon as you have quick draw hustle, your exo is as good as it's going to get for the whole game. That's
Yeah.
like, oh, it feels like
Well, there's
they're,
vitamin
these
C,
should be
but
those
let's
other
not get into
levels.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, anyways, yeah, it's
Yeah.
just the in general, right? Like the unit isn't
Yeah.
going to get better. So, like, I think that they are correct that it does add some level of strategy, but I am a fan of that, of the building over time thing, because
Yeah.
it
I
feels
mean,
like everything's kind of a little vanilla without those upgrades.
I think there's like a power fantasy, right, within RTS. You like building stuff up. You like you start with nothing. You start with a base and some workers, and then you build a whole base, you build a whole army, you take the map. And part of that is like powering up your units. And if, an early game unit is like something that you always want to rush for its research like really early, uh and you always have that research like 6 or 7 minutes in, and that's all that unit's ever going to be. It's not as exciting as powering it up
Mm-hmm.
with more upgrades. But I would, so the whole tech switching thing, I would flip it on them and say you can easily make these upgrades universal. You don't need to have flyer upgrades and ground upgrades. You don't need to have mech and bio. You don't need to have ranged and melee. You can just have it apply to the whole faction.
Oh, okay.
Can you not?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to go back on offense, I would say, but research for every single unit is a problem, because, and it was a problem in Stormgate, that I would say, okay, what's my mid game tech? I'm going to go mags.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, now I can't get flame imps until like kind of late game,
Mm-hmm.
because I just can't afford it. And so you do have, and I think that's fine. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
But like, it's the same thing. You can't just have like your tech choices need to matter,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's like, I think I would be totally open to just having, universal upgrades, if that's the starting point at least. But yeah, I do think people like powering up their units, and then it's a really important balancing tool as far as this unit is strong when everything is 0-0, and then it kind of sucks when everything's 3-3. Like you can have units that, when you get enough armor upgrades, or like in StarCraft 2, when like zealots would get +2 armor against Terran, and then they would have a guardian shield, and then it's like all of a sudden marauders and marines just did like 0 damage to them.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd have these +2 armor timing attacks. But you can switch that up. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
Stormgate's using a different armor system. They're using like a percentage based one. So like, if right now the only way you could, that it would make sense for them to implement armor upgrades is like, it's basically like you get an armor upgrade, it's like now you take 5% less damage. So whether something's hitting you really hard slowly, or it's hitting you, for just a little bit but really fast, it's has kind of the same effect.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, StarCraft is totally different than that. You get armor upgrades against something that doesn't do much damage, but it hits really fast. And those armor upgrades are really effective against it.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, there's a big difference there. And that might be the biggest problem if Stormgate ever wanted to experiment with it. I think it's a little bit weird with the armor system they've chosen, but it would still be valuable for a lot of other reasons. The main reason being, my first reason, is that I just want something more expensive that takes a longer amount of time that I can invest in if I want to. But I think they're trying to build the factions so that people generally get like one of each unit every single game, or they're like, that would be good.
Mm-hmm.
I think, according to them, right? And so they probably don't want to match up where there are like 3 or 4 units that you just would never build. And I think they'd have to be universal upgrades. But I'm just a little worried as they do they're going to rework the creeps, and I think they're going to make it even more important to stay out on the map and have it be more of a game of like territory control. And I just don't want the game to get too much to be just like blah, where you're mainly just rallying units out on the map as fast as you can. Because the most interesting things about StarCraft to me, I mean, you look at TVZ, you look at Pro Gamer TVZ, and you say, you know, and they're constantly fighting over placing creep and killing creep tumors. And you say, holy shit, this is amazing. Like, they're fighting all over the map. It's constant action. It's amazing multitasking and micro, and their macro is perfect too. This is just like, this is the perfect matchup. This is StarCraft at its peak. But it's like mechanically StarCraft at its peak, and like tactically StarCraft at its peak. But it's like they're doing the same build orders. Almost like the interesting stuff can happen in early game when they're doing little tweaks and stuff. But when we're talking about that mid game, late game that everybody talks up so much, it's strategically pretty bland, right?
Yeah.
It's just like two mechanics, like juggernauts, just going head to head, and it's cool to watch. But StarCraft needs to offer a lot more than that. And so if they're making StormGate to be more like that, where, you know, you're just kind of strategically obligated to make units, and, you know, I think it's going to be about multitasking and splitting armies and stuff. And so that's kind of cool and fun, but I'm a little worried about the strategical depth there. It's like I want to have a really good reason to not just make units as soon as I can and rally them out to go like claim a spot on the map.
Yeah, let me throw a couple things in, because you've said like several very interesting things. So first off,
your turn to have a rant.
I'm frothing here to mention a couple things. So first off, the percentage based armor. I think the reason they chose that, and I'm not a huge fan of that, but the reason they chose that, I think, is because there's not +1 and +2, etc. Like it doesn't really make sense with that type of thing. That's the only reason I can think why they would choose that, because everything makes way more sense and is so much more understandable if you have +1, +2, etc. if you have the regular armor system that we normally have in RTS. So I think that's why that was chosen. And if they were to go down that route, it would be really silly, I think, to keep percentage based armor, because that's like it's like, wait, what is this 20% of 7 damage now? Like what? You know, and you know, when you're scratching your head, instead of no, it's 7 - 2. Okay, so just do it that way. So that's really different. As far as you mentioned, like you would be on board for a blanket upgrade for a race, I actually think that would actually come with its own huge problems. If you think back, where it's like your steady progression of tech would always go up, I think, at that point, right? There would be no payoff to continue to use lower tier units if there were blanket upgrades, right? So like we'd both be upgrading our Marines, Marauders, Zealots, Stalkers in the early game, and then as we tech up, it's like, well, now we both have, by the end of the game, we both have 3/3 BC versus Carrier or whatever, right? Like I feel like that would turn into that really, really quickly. So I definitely disagree with like the blanket overall upgrade. I think that the tension between different types of upgrades is where it's really, really interesting. But yeah, I mean, that does make it so it is hard in some situations to go back and get these other upgrades. Well, StarCraft 2 fixed some of that by combining some. They did combine some of the upgrades for Terran, right? Because it was like, okay, how do you get, like, what was it, air armor, right? Or where it's like, we're getting a little bit far out there where this is actually very hard to get. So understandable, but yeah, I don't know. As far as those upgrades, wait a second. The thing that you were just saying before we said that about rallying like the ball out and having it be mechanical as opposed to like strategic, like is it going to become bland strategically? Well, I think that a lot of people that don't spend a ton of time actually getting good at RTS games, and I think that this is most of the fans that I've ever spoken to, and when I'm like reading when people want help in a game or something, and like, oh, how do I solve this strategy? Right? You've seen so many of these posts on Team Liquid or Reddit or whatever. They're like, well, how do I stop carriers? And so then you'll have other noobs being like, well, I mean, you can use like Vikings, or if it's StarCraft 1, it's like, well, you can get ghosts or Goliaths, and like here, and they answer a strategy question with a strategy, where the actual answer is, well, this is a tempo based thing because there's a transitionary phase into the carriers. So you actually need to put on more pressure while they're going for the carriers, right? So that's the actual answer. But
Yeah.
I think that people that like lower level people that oftentimes the people making the games, oftentimes the fans watching the games and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
think that everything should be solved with strategy. And I've heard so many people talk about their strong opinions about something like Stormgate, where they don't want it to be like, well, I hope you don't have to use like too much APM because I want to actually use my brain or something,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So I
Uh-huh.
think that this is a big part of it, where they want everything to be solved. Like they want it so that everything can basically be solved with a strategy. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not really possible in the real world because it's a real-time strategy game. It's not chess, it's
Mm-hmm.
not turn-based. So at some location you're going to have this skill gate that just closes on people, where it's like, it doesn't matter how good your strategy is, bro, even if you think you understand it the whole way, there is this execution thing, right? So I feel like the blandness you're talking about, they think won't occur. This is just me guessing, right? Like I haven't talked to them
Mm-hmm.
about this specifically. You just made me think of this. But like they my guess is people think that you can solve that blandness by having other counters that can come out, to which your opponent must now, instead of continuing to mechanically play very fast and being very active with their stuff on the map, with their rallied blob or whatever, go back and make a different strategic choice to try to counter you, and then you make another strategic choice to try to counter them. And right, like I think that is oftentimes what game designers and fans think can happen and are trying to make happen, which I don't think can happen. I don't think that that's real. Like I think there are counters and stuff, and there are different ways you can think around this. But yeah, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I would at least say that if you're gonna make like a StarCraft 2 type game and not get too far away from what StarCraft 2 is, then you're exactly right. I think there's probably ways to get more creative and start bending genres and that kind of thing, to achieve that. But we've got like, I mean, Stormgate's pretty similar, I
Mm.
would say. I mean, it's different in a lot of ways. It's not a clone. I know it has units that look like they were plucked straight from Star.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's similar, but it's different. But I think it's similar enough where I think, you know, people like you and me who played StarCraft for so long and then played StarCraft 2 its entire, I mean, we didn't play StarCraft 2 its entire life, but I mean, we were there from the start
Mm-hmm.
and know all about it. Um, yeah, I think we can recognize, okay, this game has similarities to StarCraft in a bunch of different ways, and when you change this, that might be okay. If you change that, now I'm like more worried,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm just not sure. Like, I feel like we're getting their first draft, and I just don't know. I just hope that if things don't work, that they'll change things, I guess, right? Like, it's too early to say really what's going to work and what's not going to work because we haven't seen their final vision.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, I just don't know how flexible they are while they're in the process of getting their final vision out there. And so that's like just a little bit of my concern about the development of the game. And then if we want to just stop talking about upgrades, you feel good about that?
Yeah.
Or did you want
I
to?
think we're on a very similar page about the upgrades.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I could talk forever, but I want to talk about other things.
Mm-hmm.
The micro. If we could just like talk really broadly about just micro, and even just thinking about what it is to micro in a MOBA
Mm-hmm.
and micro in an RTS. And I mean, to me, so in a MOBA, you've got a hero, and I never played Warcraft 3 a lot, so like the Warcraft 3 players are going to be screaming at me, and it's like you know, because they have heroes, and I've
That's all
never
right.
played an RTS with
We
heroes.
can't hear them from their
Yeah,
caves. It's fine.
that's true. But like, so I mean, like Warcraft 3. Let's just forget about Warcraft 3. Okay,
Mhm.
but like MOBAs, because MOBAs are what are really popular right now, and what I think when you're making a new RTS, and kind of like with Stormgate, I think they want to take back some of the MOBA players that like League and Dota stole from StarCraft 2, basically, right? StarCraft 2 was the game, and then like these free to play games that were, you know, these MOBAs just got really popular very soon after and stole the spotlight. And so I think they want to steal some back and also capture the RTS audience. And in a MOBA, you've got, you know, one hero generally, but it has a bunch of different abilities. And with some exceptions, you're only ever controlling the one unit. You know, there are exceptions. You can have items that spawn more units. You can have heroes that their whole thing is that they're like multiple units. But for the most part, you just control one unit. But it has a bunch of abilities. And RTS, it's the basic thing of RTS is that you're controlling multiple units. And so you know, the positioning of all of these units becomes overwhelming. So you cannot perfectly position everything all the time, right? You can't individually control every single unit. And so you do your best to position groups and have them attack at the right times and have them move at the right times, but that becomes way too much. And we also have abilities. We have spellcasters, right? And then we have, you know, things like stalkers that just have a free ability on a cooldown that you do pretty often, or you have something like Storm that's a very expensive ability. So you have these different kinds of abilities and you cast them. And so I think what I'm seeing, like from Zero Space and a little bit from Stormgate, is I think you're trying to make the spell casting easier, right? That's part of what we need to do, you know, to, you know, that's when we went from StarCraft 1 to StarCraft 2, we had to accept multiple building selection. We had to accept unlimited unit selection. Those were very hard pills for us to swallow. And I think the whole like spell casting thing is something that is going to evolve now too for all the new RTSs coming out. And so I'm a little bit worried about specifically about Infernal because Vanguard has a lot more abilities to cast. Infernal just feels like it's all setup. And so you had the Flame Imps that are like Banelings for people who didn't play a lot, and then you had the Magmadons. Those were your two ways to like deal a lot of damage. Like really the only two ways, and the only way that they deal a lot of damage basically is if you catch your opponent off guard.
Yeah.
Because both of them are slow. And so like you have to catch your opponent out of position, you have to like flank them, you have to trap them, you have to distract them somewhere else and then attack their army. That kind of thing. It feels very setup based. And then once the fight starts, there's not a lot to do. It felt like there's not a lot to do, especially against Vanguard. And in Infernal versus Infernal Mirror, there's a lot more to do. And I'm just a little bit worried because it feels to me, as I mentioned earlier, that this is a game where you're probably supposed to get a pretty wide variety of units. Like a lot of the units are supposed to be useful and like work together. And if you want to call it the Infernal kit, once you got all the Infernal units out there, and bear in mind we don't have tier 3 yet, but most of your play time is not going to be in tier 3, right? You're going to play game after game after game where it ends in tier 1 or tier 2. Unless that's not going to be the vision and they're going to like basically make you get to tier 3, we'll see. But it just doesn't feel like this game, like a MOBA player is going to play Infernal and be like, oh, this feels fun to control. Like I don't see it at all. You know what I mean? Like you want to have things to click. You want to feel like, oh, these are the spells. Here's how they interact. Here's the synergy, that kind of thing. And let me tell you, as someone who is a high level Infernal player, I took games just to give my credentials. The people who are like winning the tournaments and getting in the finals of the tournaments. I never played Parting, who was definitely the best player, but everyone else I could take games off of, right? And so the decisions are like what to focus fire, when to chase, when to retreat. And those are the like mid battle decisions, right? It's not like, oh, I understand this spell is easy to understand. It's easy to understand how to get high value out of this spell. And I just need, like, I'm focused on casting this well. And my opponent knows that I want to cast that well, so he's trying to avoid it, and that kind of tension. It was way more like, to me, basic fundamental RTS micro of just like knowing what to focus, knowing what to retreat, body blocking with units and all this kind of stuff. And because there wasn't anything else to do. There weren't a lot of spells. It's like you have a brute, you can split it before it dies. And so it's like, okay, I need to make sure I press Z like at the right time, right? But that's not a splashy, like, fun thing. And in this build, the gaunts, their infestability, that's just a passive. A lot of the researches, even for Vanguard, are like passives. And I don't know. I'm just like a little concerned. Like I kind of like the idea of what I think what Zero Space has is, even if you select every single unit that you can build, you can like cast a spell from any of them.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I'm like, okay, that's what a MOBA player needs.
Yeah.
And that's what I want it too. It's fun, right? Like, it's fine. And so, but it feels, and Vanguard has a lot more spells. I don't know if there are more abilities / spells that Infernal are supposed to get and they haven't gotten them yet, but it feels like really not there. And then it also feels like there's not a lot to do mid-fight. And so that's like a little concerning to me. And I don't know if that's the vision, if they think they can make a faction like that for players who like just doing setups that pay off, or they get punished, or what. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's okay. It's interesting. As soon as you started talking about the MOBA players and trying to get them back, I actually immediately thought of the Zero Space, like all spellcast type of functionality that they have, because that I was like, oh, that's actually a really good point, because you can kind of control the whole army almost as if it's a different hero every time. You know what I mean? So that's the first thing I thought about, and then I started thinking about and StormGate. And as you mentioned, right, Infernal doesn't have a lot of abilities, so it seems like Zero Space is kind of doing that idea of yours, but it doesn't feel as much like. It definitely feels like StormGate is staying a little bit more true to RTS in a way, which I don't think is necessarily bad. As far as what you said about Infernals, I totally found that to be the case as well. Like, definitely in late game, it felt like Vanguard definitely had an advantage if Infernal wasn't already ahead at that point, because they're just like there are these slow units that you're setting up, and it really was about like did their banelings come in from a funny side, and I lost the game because of that, right? Like that's when I got to late game, I felt like that was what was deciding it often. But maybe they're like it feels almost, when you describe it, and then I think back to all the games I played, that it's like they're giving like each of the races like a very distinct feel, because Vanguard definitely feels like StarCraft 2 Terran. Running around, microing with Lancer, Exo, MedTech was very much like, microing a bio ball in StarCraft 2. You even have the Atlases that come out like tanks and everything, and you have your evacs coming out to move them around and everything. So it really did feel like that. And then it kind of was that swarmy, roach-lingish type of army from Infernal in a lot of ways. Like, some of the early game I thought was a little bit more interesting, with the Doomsayers and everything, like dropping around and you had some movement, and I like the trees and stuff and some of the interesting things you could do with that and some of the interesting creep mechanics and whatnot. But like, it definitely just is, it feels like there's not there. It didn't feel like there was a ton of interaction. It feels like with Infernals, you're kind of playing single player a little bit, and just making sure you have the right stuff at the right time, which you can see Zerg played like that for sure, right? Kind of like if you think back to old Savior style, or even a lot of Serals games nowadays, where you're kind of sitting back on their creep and macroing hard, and it's kind of on you to slow them down, and then they just kind of swarm and have enough that you can't stop it. Like, that's the idea of like perfect Zerg. So it kind of feels like that's what it was. And like, I guess I can agree that a race like Infernal is not probably going to win back players that want, that enjoy playing a MOBA. It really, it's not anywhere near a MOBA at that, with that
Yeah.
race.
Yeah. And I was, I was joking with someone, but like, they've talked up their engine, the like 64 hertz tick rate or whatever it is, and they're implementing rollback into an RTS, which has only ever been in fighting games. And it's like, wow, they're building an incredible engine for this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look at hardware advances, which doesn't have anything to do with Frost Giant, but just, as a gamer, the mice are getting lighter. I've got a wireless mouse now that I was like, oh, I'll never have a wireless mouse. Batteries are too heavy.
Yeah.
They're so light and they're so responsive. I'm like, how can it be wireless and so like
Yeah.
responsive and light? And now they are. And it's like, oh, now I never have to worry about a cord. And same with the keyboards. They have the new like linear keys. I don't know if you've heard about those or have one of those, but there's new keyboard technology that's crazy responsive. The monitors are getting more responsive and like vibrant, like the OLEDs are insane. All this stuff, right? And what I'm watching the fight and I'm waiting to press Z when I want to split a brute. Like that's why I've got that's why I'm living in 2024. That's like,
and
like
they even made it so you don't have to press the Z, right? Like they will do its split for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can, yeah.
You're missing out on some shield or whatever, but it's
if it's infested, then and you split it, then it won't spawn. If that's really important for Infernal versus Infernal.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like where like when I remember finding about Blink Stalkers. And like what Protoss player was like didn't want to just go Blink and just be like, I'm gonna Blink my ass off. I'm gonna like micro so well with Blink that I'm just gonna like start winning games. Like that's like an exciting ability that like makes people want to like makes people want to build stalkers and just do a stalker timing and just blink their heart out, right?
Yeah.
And it's like where's that unit in Stormgate? Like to me, like shouldn't the game be full of units like that it's like, wow, this is like a really intriguing ability that like it's very easy to understand how to make this ability effective. And I want to just go out and do it. I want to build this unit and I want to go out there and I want to use this unit. And it's like it's kind of there with the like I said, with the Magmadons, the Flame Imps, they can be insanely effective if you get the setup, if you get contact, if you get them close enough. They're very slow, but if you can get them close enough, then they just like destroy, right? And it's like, I feel like that can only go so far because that's the setup of the battle. That's the start of the battle. But they've purposely made a game with a higher time to kill. And if you're going to make a game with a higher time to kill, you can't just have an interesting start to the battle. You can't have a race that's all about setups. Every single faction needs interesting things to do throughout this whole long protracted battle.
Yeah.
But for Infernal right now, for the last phase, and I feel so bad if like Monk's probably inevitably gonna watch this or listen to it, and the game could be totally different, and like a lot of these concerns won't even exist next phase, right?
Yeah.
But it's like we want to talk about what we've seen.
Yeah.
And if these things aren't problems, it's not like us being critical right now is going to matter at all in the long run. It's all going to get erased. We're going to be streaming Stormgate. All's going to be well.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I went on too long of a tangent. I don't remember how I was going to finish the point, but it's like you just need some with a higher time to kill. It's like that was their design. They want the higher time to kill. So you need like the Weaver. It's one of the high-tech units that you barely ever saw, but it's had a ton of health and it had a yank ability, right? It can yank units in, and so that ability has a fairly short cooldown. You can expect to use it a second time in a fight, and maybe even a third time if the fight goes really long. And so to me, that's that's great. That's good. But that's like the only example. That's like my only good thing that I can point out
Yeah.
for Infernal. Otherwise, it feels like setup, and you're like, oh, I got a great setup. This is good. I'm gonna like I got the fight started well, so now I can be aggressive and chase him down and whatever. Or the fight started poorly. It's like now I got to retreat, but my units are slower. I can't even really retreat because
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the Exos and the Lancers are too fast. And it's like now just let me watch how much of my army gets slaughtered, and I'm back hiding behind my shroud stones and pumping out more, new units, and hopefully I can hold this off. But it's like that's not fun at all. And it's like for a game that said they wanted a higher time to kill and was talking
Hmm.
about how like responsive and everything is going to be. And in my mind, they never said this, but in my mind, I'm like, you got to steal back some of the MOBA players back to the RTS genre.
Hmm.
It's like, where are all the things I'm clicking? Like,
Yeah.
like what am I doing? And so as a competitive player, I can stay focused and just like, all right, how do I win games? But then now that has passed and we're between phases and I can't even play the game, and I'm thinking more design wise, and I'm like, this is kind of weird to me.
Yeah, yeah, no, it really came together actually when you mentioned the time to kill thing. And for people that don't understand what he's talking about, they basically took it and they didn't want armies to die as quickly as StarCraft 2, which is probably good. Stuff dies
Good.
pretty fast in StarCraft 2. But it goes towards Warcraft 3, where you might look at a Warcraft 3 battle and you're kind of like, well, this is a little bit silly how long these units stay alive. Like it does feel a little bit long there. So they're trying to find some sort of good middle ground, and it feels a little bit closer to War 3 than Star 2, I would say, in my opinion, from playing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way. Let me just pause this to you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for Infernal, would it be okay if, because of the way that it's designed, right? Like, what if the way that you end up playing Infernal, because it doesn't do that much during battles, it is more about the setup, is more multitasking oriented? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
if it's really much more about, okay, you set up this kind of area and they start the battle, and then you're shoving somewhere else with like a drop with the Doomsayer or whatever, or you're running Spriggans around the map to do this or something. Like, I wonder if something like that, because definitely I found when I switched over, the main reason I liked Vanguard more is because I had to click so much. Like, I had to do so much shit during the battle that it was just like intense. I was my arm was getting more tired than playing StarCraft 1. I was just like, damn, man, like you have to kite literally nonstop to keep the quick draw hustle going, So it's like you're really intense. It feels a lot. I felt like I was Clem or something. It was great. But yeah, maybe I mean, I'm not saying that that's the way that it's going to go, but you're definitely right that in the battle there's not a whole lot to do. There's like a little bit of targeting, a little bit of Z. If you look at it versus specifically Vanguard, it's like, yeah, you're gonna use the trample thing on the Magmadons and try to flank maybe a little bit here, and maybe you cast a spell or two from the top bar, right? But that is about it. But would it be fine, because we haven't seen the third race? So maybe right, because the Vanguard feels more finished than Infernal, and maybe Infernal is just as finished. I don't know what their final plans are, but Vanguard, I'm like, oh, this is like, there's so many things here. I feel like I can dive into Vanguard for a long time and have a lot to do, even with what they've released. But I definitely feel the same on Infernal. So maybe the third race will have more like individual unit abilities, whereas you definitely are walking around as a ball with Vanguard. It's not about like a little tiny amount running around. It's more of, running around with a bio ball or whatever, and then maybe it's macro Zerg with Infernal, and then you get like Blink Stalkers with whatever the third race may end up being. Like, I'm not sure, but what do you think about the possibility that like maybe that there is this other way that you play? Maybe they want it so it's setup based, and because then newbies, because this is the thing with RTS, you don't want to just get people like you and me who have spent 25 years playing fucking RTS games. You want the younger people to come in and like it. And if there's like a million things to do, they generally don't like it as much. Whereas if it's like, okay, you can just set up and play like this, and then the pro gamers will also have 3 other attacks going on at the same time or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, yeah, it's very important that there's a good casual player experience for sure. although as a very quick side point that I don't want to go on about, the fact that they're really emphasizing like fleshing out co-op and then having this 3v3 mode that's not just 1v1 with 3 players. It's like a totally different thing that's going to have heroes and whatever. Like players who don't want to play competitive 1v1 can get out.
That's true.
Play that other shit.
That's true. That's true.
But anyway,
You're already
but
fragmenting the player base with that, so may as well, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, you want to have asymmetry between the races, and that's important. But then you also have to have like, what's the soul of our game? Like, what's like, you know, what's the same between all the races, basically, or you know, what's the gameplay that we think is really fun and cool that we want to be present in every single matchup. And if they go too extreme with, you know, with Infernal being the way it is, if they really like go into that more, I mean, I guess it's not for me. I also don't think it's for like this decade. Like I don't think it's next gen RTS, right? It's not. I don't think it's what is popular trendy game design right now. And I mean popular and trendy is like desirable things, right?
Sure.
It's like just what people are enjoying right now. And so, I mean, even if this game survives and it's, you know, lives as long as StarCraft 2 has, you can have, you know, in 4 years, they could like rework it, right? It could become a little bit different if they want to. I mean, the MOBAs kind of have reworks too. You can't completely make it a new game, but if they want to shift the way the game works a little bit, there will be opportunities to like realign the gameplay down the line, I think. But I just remembered too, I wanted to add to my point about the responsiveness. The Hellborn, I never talked about the Hellborn, which is the like siege unit for the Infernal.
Yeah.
It's the slowest. I'm pretty sure that the term is attack point for how long a unit takes. Like you tell it to attack, how long until the attack goes through. It's the highest like attack point value I've ever seen in my life.
Well, that's since the patch. It might have been before as well, but the newer patch for the Hellborn.
Oh yeah.
That made it like they shored up its stats so you didn't have to have as many for which I like that because actually I played a lot of both races and I actually was going a lot of Hellborns because I'm like, this is more interesting, you know, because at least I can set things up and push and stuff. But like, the wind up on him is, it's. Like, think about how slow a Reaver shoots. That would be a crackling next to this. Like, it is. I've never seen anything that slow. It's like if you made, you know, these like bad RTSs that come out that have like a tier 7 god unit or something. You're like, watch this, and it's a guy playing with one hand. He's showing his friend, and this is how you do it. And like, it's like one of those units, but it's a fucking siege unit, and then things come after it, and you want to micro it back, but it's like, well, it'll never shoot if you try to run away. Like, it's
like really wonky to control, and I'm just like, I don't understand what this unit is doing in this game. Like if I'm just trying to understand their like design vision or whatever, it just seems like this shouldn't have made it past the whiteboard, like the brainstorm session, because it just seems a little bit weird to me. Especially like, why does my mouse have like an 8,000 hertz polling rate for the Hellborn with a 4-second wind up? This doesn't really matter if I'm a little bit slow on telling my Hellborn to attack. Like if my response time is like 20 milliseconds faster than a non-pro gamer, it's like, okay, so it'll attack in 4.02 seconds instead of 4.04 or something.
They need to speed that. They'll figure that one out for sure, because like anyone that's given any feedback on that has to be like, even the guys that play with one hand and will never go beyond single player have to be like, wait, what? How? What's he even doing? Is he stretching before a baseball match? What is this move? Like,
it's weird. But to your point, I would like to give a shout out to the people designing this game. Every single time like we've given feedback and then we've gotten a patch, like a mid-phase patch, like I think they make excellent adjustments. And so like the Hellborn is an example of something that we got that unit. It was a new unit. It's so fat, and it just doesn't fit on these maps. You had to have like 8 of them for it to be effective. And then, like you said, they made it more expensive, but then they also made it stronger. So now instead of having 8 of them, you have 5 of them. It's easier to get them all to attack together and that kind of thing. It's like it's a good decision, but I'm still just questioning like why. And that's another. I'm pretty sure that unit is supposed to get an ability too. And so like we definitely have units like missing abilities. I know that for sure. It's just yeah, so that, I mean, that's one other thing I just want to say about abilities that I remember talking about before, but there are abilities that are about setup, and then there are abilities that you need to, or there are abilities that you know how you're going to use before you go into the fight. And so the easiest one for me to say is Guardian Shield. Okay. It's not complicated. You need to pop a Guardian Shield when the fighting starts, and then then it's there. It's just there, right? Yeah. Like, you want to have a Guardian Shield up. Like this, there's nothing simpler in the world. Force Field on the same unit, so this is Sentry is an excellent unit, is exactly the opposite. Like, you might know how you would land optimal force fields in this situation, right? Because you've played this build 100 times. And so you in a way you can argue you know what your plan is with the force fields. But the thing is, you don't know exactly how your enemy's going to move. You don't know. It's like, if he comes in with 4 roaches, do I force field and try to catch those 4 roaches and keep my momentum going? Or do I let them go? I want to save my energy, kind of thing, right? And it's this huge judgment call. If you look at like Parting's Soul Train build, that's a build that's an all-in like timing attack, 2 base, Protoss versus Zerg. Sentries are involved. You have a certain amount of sentry energy you can use. So there's a number of Guardian Shields you can use. There's a number of Force Fields you can use, and you need to use them judiciously. And it's like, that's really exciting to me. And we need abilities that you really don't know exactly how you're going to use them. You need to be watching the fight, and it needs to be a big deal if you decide to like use it or not. And so it's okay to have some setup abilities as like a few things of, just to give you something to do, make you feel good, like you're powering up. I think it's part of the power fantasy of just playing the game of like, this feels good to do. I know this is the right thing to do. It's easy to do. I'm going to do it. All right, I did it. That feels good. Now let's fight. But then you also need these just like crazy unpredictable abilities that you have to figure out in the middle of the fight. And so I hope there's a lot of those. The Weaver yank, I think, is a good example of that. Of like, what am I going to yank? Is this a juicy enough unit to yank, or is it not worth it? Do I want to save the yank until it does something more effective than just like picking off one unit, that kind of thing? And so that's fun to me. And so we'll see what direction the abilities go in. But if there aren't enough of those abilities to keep you interested mid-fight, that's going to be a problem. And if too much of the like research is passives, to me that's a problem too. Like, I hope they have a plan in mind of, these are the things people are going to be clicking during battles, like for each faction, like a nice kit that goes together and is like fun to use, fun to play, and makes people excited to like micro, right? Makes you want to go micro.
Yeah, I worry that there won't be too many of those. Like, I'm sure that they're gonna have to put in some, and there's already like a little bit, right? Like there's that 6 shield for Vanguard, and like, there's some medtech stuff that like speeds you up that I've seen used a few times. That was pretty neat. Not as much with the Infernals yet, of course, like we've been talking about, but like for instance, when they made it so that the auto split happens on the brute, right? Like, part of the reasoning behind that is because like doing it versus not doing it is 100% versus 0%. So like, okay,
yeah,
I get that, but that's like the type of punishment that you kind of want to see at high levels, where I want to be able to, while I'm commentating and building up the story for some, like, oh my God, fucking NonY missed the pop on this one, this one dude, and so his opponent got a fiend and he got no fiends. It's crazy, and like things like that can be very exciting, but they don't want this necessarily for the newbier players, right? Where it's
Mm,
just like it'll feel bad because it doesn't go right. So it's like I feel like there won't be as many things. Like this has been something that's happened in
mm,
StarCraft 2 so many times. There's like a lot of hand holding things that happen in patches, like the siege
mm-hmm.
mode for observers and
Oh yeah,
overseers. They
yeah,
literally made it that you could siege mode them so that you wouldn't F2 a move it into an army. They also gave
yeah,
the High Templar a ranged attack that does basically no damage, so it won't just walk into an army when it gets F2A moved. And when I see a patch like that, I am against that type of thing. I am completely
mm-hmm.
against that in all its forms. When you water something down that much and you're like, see, we just did these things to make sure that you don't completely fuck up when you're being lazy. And it's like, it's supposed to be a fucking competitive game. What are we doing? Like
Yeah,
that's where I find a lot of the fun to be is like, yeah, get good at splitting your brutes. Make the decision, you know? It's like the fact that I can attack move my brutes and not worry because I'm still going to get like very close to full value, if not full value out of them every time because they'll split themselves. Or I can decide like, oh, maybe I should make the fiends right now because I have to look away, right? Like things like that
right,
I find to be
yeah,
that's like what makes Brood War so good, right? Is that you have to make decisions like that. Like, you know, when you decide something that, you know, you're there's like you have to split the path. It's like, okay, well, you can go this way or this way. Make the decision. Okay, I'm going this way. Right. And because of that, you're giving out up certain things to gain other certain things. And that's, in my opinion, why RTS is so good. So I get worried when, like, for instance, the fact that you can macro, like, you can sit there and you can macro Terran or Zerg in StarCraft 2, never switching your screen. You can micro your army the entire time and
mm-hmm.
macro perfectly. And it's like, well, I mean, maybe you might have to go back and make a depot or something, right? But like, when you know, even that, in my opinion, you're not giving up enough for what you're getting, right? And that makes the skill differentiation like a lot, it's a lot harder to differentiate those skills.
Yeah,
Whereas you watch someone where it's like, well, no, you have to give up so many things to do anything, then you really start seeing who's who. And like the difference between the best and the second best player is huge, and the second best and third best is huge. And like, you know, whereas you have like 30 pros that all macro exactly the same in this game, right? And so I
yeah,
feel like without these moves, are we going to have this weird bland top where it's like, okay, well, I mean, we all can kind of macro the same and the brutes split themselves and there's not that many abilities and we all know how to set up. And it's like, okay, where's the flavor for different players to express themselves? Because isn't that like a core
mm-hmm.
thing in RTS is you're really expressing yourself. Like you look at how you play and how someone else plays and you can very clearly see the difference.
Yeah. I mean, what? So I disagree with some. I think you're deep in Brood War brain because you play Brood War so
Me?
much.
No.
Yes. I'm not totally against those StarCraft 2 changes personally. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that I think, you know, the newer games are going to do. You know,
Mhm.
they've got they're making the UI easier. They're making little improvements like that. Like
Mhm.
Stormgate, Zero Space both have some things that are like easier about them than StarCraft 2. And like I just expect that now. But my thing is, I think if we focus on how punishing things are allowed to be, like if you control them well versus if you control them poorly, I think that's like a really important issue. And like I think what you want with a game is where you can have things be really exciting and really punishing, and things go really poorly for you or go really well for you, but not not in terms of the entire game of whether you're winning or losing. Like just that little battle, right? Like I want battles to be able to be very black and white. If one player like totally out micros the other player, or if one player just isn't paying attention, I want those units to be able to be slaughtered, right?
Mhm.
And for it to be very black and white. But then, you know hopefully that doesn't mean that the game's over, because like that's what we see with disruptor shots, right?
Mhm.
Disruptor shots are the most extreme thing, where it's like you land the disruptor shot, it does so much damage that now that player can just be super aggressive and just like end the game, right? And like I don't think that's good. And you can see that too with like even with like Storm on more fragile units that the Storm will kill, you know, or you just like land multiple Storms on a bio ball when the Terran's not looking, game's over, right? Like stuff like that is things people don't like about StarCraft 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I still want those exciting things to happen. I just don't want them to be game ending. And I mean, it's hard to adjust StarCraft 2 to accommodate that. But if you're building a new game from the ground up, like, isn't that the ideal? I don't know. So like I feel like they're not being ambitious enough. But like by taking that away and saying like, you know, we just want something that's unmicroed or poorly microed. We don't want it to be totally slaughtered and totally bad and ineffective. We want it to still have like a certain like baseline of effectiveness. And then something that's perfectly microed is, you know, instead of being, you know, 200% effective, it's like 50% more effective. So it's like you're going to get a good trade, but it's not like overwhelming. And so it's like that's it. That's what's exciting to play, is getting that like 200% effectiveness. It's what's exciting to watch. But then yeah, it's bad for the game if you are able to do that once and that ends the game. Like I don't think that should be a thing. So like you want to have like a lot of battles where that's possible. And I mean, maybe that's, you know, if the map's about territory control, so you're supposed to be out there, you're supposed to be splitting armies. Like to me, that's an opportunity to do that, right? Is like if one little army gets slaughtered and then you lose that like creep camp, it's not good, but it's not the end of the game. Like you're still fine. And if the reason it got slaughtered is because you weren't paying attention, then hopefully where you were paying attention, it was an advantage for you and it kind of balances out, that kind of thing. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know about having a bunch of different control points with a higher time to kill and without like these really like splashy fun to use abilities. Like it feels like it could be kind of blah. And yeah, that's a point I made earlier, but it's related. And a little side point, if I'm trying to control the map, if ultimately this game's going to be more about map control and taking creep camps and holding them, because I don't know if you saw their little thing about the creep camp rework that's coming up, but creep camps are going to be points that you control, like ongoing control, right? And so I don't know how the game's going to change, but I think it's going to change to be they want you more out on the map and like holding positions more, right? And so if that's the case, then you know, I don't understand the Infernal charge system. Like why am I banking charges and not like rallying units out as soon as possible? Like can I just ask that question? Because like when isn't the Infernal charge system is like, oh, I'm gonna like, it's so that it's like 4 defensive plays. It's like 4 withholding units and then like deciding what to make at the last minute. I don't know. It's not like it totally invalidates it, but it's another one of those things where I'm like, these designs like don't totally go together for me in my mind. But
with the new idea of the more map control centric thing, yeah, that does make sense if it's going to be more map control centric. I was actually like, when I was playing a lot of Infernal, I was trying to utilize those because that seems to me to be really strong, the way that you can hold the charges and they're instant. So like you can instantly defend with exactly the right units. So I was definitely trying to use that, which by the way, you know, that thing that refills the charges?
Yeah.
When they first made that, I just looked at it, I'm like, this is the most broken thing literally ever made in any game.
I think everyone did.
Dude.
And it was.
It was just like, broken. Hey, are you ready? Okay, here I come. And it's like fucking 400 supply across the map in 2 seconds. It was so silly. Yeah. I'm glad that they nerfed it, but it needs more nerfs. But yeah. Okay, so if it becomes more control centric, that actually nerfs the charge thing a little bit. I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
Which is maybe a good thing, because if it's not more control centric, the fact that you can hold off a little bit, like there's some very cool shit you can do with it, where like if you are waiting for a scout or for some intel to come in and you realize they aren't going to attack you and you just suddenly make 15, you know, imps or whatever, and now you're saturated fully on a new base, and it's like, damn, that's pretty sick, actually. And I could have made, you know,
Yeah.
15 gaunts or whatever it was, right? Because of the charge system. So I like the idea of other game design things maybe invalidating that, even though it sounds like they don't go together. And I definitely agree with you that if it becomes more controller oriented, you just want to have a bigger army on the map at all times. But
Yeah.
like that in and of itself, it's like it's much stronger than Larva. It's like Larva is good, but Zerg is a
Yeah.
race that you can bank with a
Yeah.
little bit, and especially with the spawn larva. But the fact that you could make anything instantly and there's no upgrades, so like anything you make is super strong when it comes out, is like, well, that's a pretty
Yeah.
fucking sick advantage. But no,
Yeah.
that is good. You mentioned because of like about the microing, like if you're microing really heavily looking for that 200% and trying to
Mhm.
punish but it doesn't end the game, like that type of idea. That now if you're going to force the game to be more on the map for map control purposes, you're trying to make more engagements, which does go against at least what we've seen so far from Infernal anyways, because Infernal is about kind of just setting up and like taking. I feel like most Infernal games are like failed engagements till you get one that works and then you win. Like that's kind
Well,
of,
think
like,
about this though.
yeah.
Vanguard has to be microed.
Yes.
So like if Vanguard's splitting their armies, now Vanguard has become like way harder to play.
Yeah.
Right. So like it's like competitively it makes Infernal seem stronger if we're splitting armies now. If you're forcing Vanguard to split armies, otherwise they're giving up a bunch of map objectives. Like that's good for Infernal. But is that fun to play? That's the thing that's still a little bit weird to me. It's like, okay, so I'm playing the faction that if we both just attack move into each other and we don't look, then my units win. That's like, okay, like great. It's good to know that, but like that's I don't know. I mean, maybe you're right that there are just players that's what they want to do. They want to because the thing I would say about Infernal charge system, it makes macro like so much easier. Like if you're not trying to use it strategically and you just have bad macro, like it's such a huge crutch. Like it makes your macro perfect.
Yeah.
It's like you're queuing a new unit at exactly the right time every single time, right? Up to until you get 3 charges. But it's like that's very generous. And so like Infernal players can basically have perfect macro with that. As far as that aspect of macro. And then you look at like Vanguard, and they have way more freebies as far as scouting. They start with the scout unit that's free scouting immediately, right? And then they have more. They have a top bar ability that helps them scout. And then I mean between those two things, and then you could start to see that maybe each faction takes like a huge pain point that people have with RTS and like alleviates it and says, all right, if you don't like getting cheesed, play Vanguard. You start with a scout. Like you can't be surprised, which isn't totally true. Cheeses have happened, but like
sure.
That could be their vision, right? Like this is the faction that like has great scouting. This is the faction that, and Vanguard has complicated macro, right? With the supply depots that can boost build speed to something nearby. It's like, okay, now I want this supply depot, and you can split it. It can be a defensive supply depot or a build speeds boosting supply depot, and it's like you want that near the unit or the building is going to boost all that kind of thing. And then the top bar ability that makes the workers build things faster. It's just insane. Like that's such a fun faction to tinker with already. The macro mechanics are really good. But then you look at Infernal, it's like, oh, okay, so this macro is like incredibly easy. Like it's really simple. Insert and until you obviously at the programmer level, it can just start to get very complex, like really quickly, right? But for everybody else, it can be very, very simple and like very easy. And so that's like maybe the third faction, they're gonna have something that makes some part of the game very relatively easy for them, right? So maybe that's a thing, and those faction asymmetries don't really tie into other designs, and it's just like, well, we got to have some like asymmetry somehow, so let's like give this to this and this to this and this to this. I don't know, we'll see.
No, I could see that. Like let's say that you just want to make big armies, you go Infernal. If you really like microing, you go Vanguard. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, whatever it is for the third race, maybe it's some sort of
Yeah.
mixture of the two, more pure in that regard, like more spells, more abilities, but also like heavy micro and heavy macro and stuff. Not sure exactly what they would do with that, but I mean
Yeah.
that could be a way, because
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure that there is a race for everyone that comes to play. Like I think
Yeah.
that's important. I think that's something Zero Space has done really well,
Uh-huh.
where the races, you know, like Protectorate. I'm like, look at that for my Protoss brothers. All right, that's so sick. You know, the MOBA
Yeah.
players, here they are. They can
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
use this. There's
Yeah.
2 units.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that could be like that doesn't sound unreasonable when we're
Yeah.
sitting here talking about. Like I
Yeah.
haven't completely thought it through because you just kind of
Yeah.
said it, but yeah.
I mean, maybe not really extreme, but
Yeah.
to an extent, it could be like that. Maybe we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, dude, are there any other big things you wanted to talk
Um
about Stormgate or
y-
anything else?
yeah, there's one more thing that's actually coming to mind a lot because we were
Uh-huh.
talking about the map control thing. So like
Mm-hmm.
I already okay, so what map control does for you, right? Like there's several different things
Mm-hmm.
that map control will do for you in an RTS game. Uh and it's already a huge advantage. Like
Mm-hmm.
whatever race has map control is the race that's considered to be advantaged in a matchup. If you just look
Yeah,
around, it's like whoever
sure.
has map control has all the power. They can expand more, they can attack more, they're in control of the game. And that's why Terran versus Protoss is hard in StarCraft 1, and Protoss versus Zerg is hard in StarCraft 1, and Zerg versus Terran is hard in StarCraft 1. And then, you know, you can bring it right over to StarCraft 2. It's the same type of thing where it's like, yeah, like Maru looks real scary until Zerg has 5 base macro going. Then he turtles like a motherfucker and Zerg takes the whole map, right? Like it's
Yeah.
that whoever has that map control. So the fact that they're kind of, if they're going to lean into making map control even stronger through things that
Mm-hmm.
aren't base core RTS concepts, the RTS concepts of I'm controlling the map, you don't know where everything is, you don't know where my attacks are coming, and I can expand more. Like those are huge advantages in every RTS game that has ever existed. So if they add anything on top of that, I'm actually suddenly getting a little bit worried where I'm like, I mean, they already had the creep camps, but you know, as you get later into the game, I'm like, yeah, you have the creep camps, but they're not that, you know, they're not
Mm-hmm.
that great. But if it becomes stronger, if you're making them more valuable, does that maybe worry you at all about maybe neglecting just the core of what gives you an advantage in RTS by making it way too strong?
Definitely. And like, yeah, I think you expressed that really well. I've had the similar concerns. I also think, to tie this all the way back to the beginning, it relates to upgrades of like, you know,
Mm,
where is my option? Like, look, I don't want to make an art. Nobody wants to make an RTS where turtling is like super strong. It's like
yeah.
the best thing to do. Okay. But you also can't make every single matchup the same, and you can't force everyone to play the same play style. Like, this is the magic of StarCraft 1, and that StarCraft 2 is able to reproduce in its own way. That the matchups are different, and some people can turtle and some people can all in, and like all the play styles are like valid, right? And I mean, it depends what race you play, but like you said, the way that Brood Wars, uh, well, okay, I guess Zerg always wants to out expand Terran and Protoss, right?
Mm,
But like, at least from my perspective as Protoss, it goes both ways of like, oh, I'm expanding more than Terran, I'm expanding less than Zerg. And
yeah.
so like, we've lived a charmed life as Protoss players. And then Terran always has the fewest bases. Zerg always has the most. Okay. I acknowledge that, right? But like, still, I think variety of play style where people can play their race how they want to play, and like, just, even if it's not super strong, like you're not saying like, oh, I'm gonna like turtle and mech every game, and when everyone else is going bio and is out on the map, it's like, it doesn't need to be that extreme, but it needs to be like, okay, I just got ahead, how do I get more ahead? Do I expand or do I start upgrades now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, that's a really interesting decision. And like, that's why I cared about upgrades, and that's why I boiled it down to, let's just think about research and upgrades and say research are the quicker, cheaper things, and upgrades are the more expensive, more timelier, like time cost things,
Mm-hmm.
and say, do we want to have things like that that just cost a lot of money and take a lot of time to like make your unit stronger? And like to me, the reason why I cared about that is because I think it's important for that, like the variety in strategy, variety in like matchups and that kind of thing. And so I don't know, the game could definitely be too homogenous if
Mm-hmm.
everybody. I spent a lot of the time playing the last stretch that I played of this last phase. Creeping is super super strong on that map. That was the last map, and I kept trying to play Infernal and versus Infernal without creeping at all. Just
Mm-hmm.
like, let me expand, let me see if it's viable, at least in this build on this map right now. Like build a Stormgate build, like that phase, and on this map, can I make it possible that I can play this play style of
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna just like I'm not gonna contest the map, and it was really really hard. It wasn't that great, and it's like I don't know if they want that to be possible or not.
Mm.
And so yeah, I'm just a little bit worried, and I like the tension between expanding versus teching versus upgrading
Yeah.
and turtling versus being on the map and that kind of thing. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how these games, which really don't want there to be any inactive periods in the
Yeah.
game, really, like they want action throughout the whole game, how they're going to solve that. And it's like, to me, it's like, hey, if there's one matchup that's action, like nonstop action, that's great. But they can't, maybe shouldn't all be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it's just going to be, if your game is really similar to StarCraft, the more similar it is to StarCraft, the harder it is for me to imagine that being possible. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally get what you're saying with that. It's like going back to like just the real quick, the styles that people may want to play as, if you're kind of always, if the whole, like everything about the game is trying to get you to go out on the map, and it seems to be like this is just where RTS is going. Stormgate's doing it, Zero Space is doing it, where it's like we want player engagement with each other, right? We don't want, because there are games sometimes in StarCraft 2 and StarCraft 1 where it's just single player on both sides for a bit.
Yeah.
That does happen.
You probably know this best out of anyone. I think the commentators know it best.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no.
Then you have to talk,
dude. As soon as the second Stargate starts in PvZ, man, in StarCraft 2, I'm like, oops, we're going to 32 minutes. Okay, like that's when the map is almost mined out. Sick.
Yeah.
And those do kind of suck, but like if it's always pointing towards let's be active together on the map, there is something missing there. Like one of the, that's if someone's being really active and kind of aggressive, like one of the peak ways to stop that in StarCraft is to get an upgrade and make your army higher quality and then come out when that's ready and like be like, yeah, you were busy and I kind of turtled and now I have an edge and you have to do counterplay to that. And that is something that's missing.
To point out, to get more specific on what we've seen from Stormgate so far, and also to compare it to Zero Space, the armies in Stormgate feel pretty like snowbally right now. So like, if fiends start spawning on the Vanguard army and you kind of get that momentum, then the Vanguard army can't retreat because the fiends are fast. And the Vanguard, the Infernal army cannot retreat from like Exos just like kiting forward, right?
No.
And so
the best you can do is turn around 2 Magmadons and try to make them kite back against it. That's it.
That's all you can do. And so it does. And I really hate that. What's worse than feeling like you can't retreat? Like you're committed. Like it just feels awful. Like it's so much more fun to play these games when you can go around the map and just see what you can get done, and you won't get like super punished for just trying to play the game. And it seems, and so Zero Space has, I know like I didn't play it a ton, but like the heroes all have like a kind of a free recall that they can do. It seemed like every faction and like every hero had kind of, I don't know, I don't remember all the specifics, but like a free recall.
Basically,
so it's basically saying, you like go do stuff. If it doesn't look good, leave. Like cast this ability. Like as simple as that. And so like I'm not saying that that's right for Stormgate, but I am saying, you know, if you want me out on the map, like, yeah, it's like you said, like in StarCraft, there's usually one race or the other has map control. One race or the other is free to be on the map. And then it's fun when that shifts, right? Like
Yeah.
Protoss gets blink stalkers. Now they have map control. And then at some point it's like, dude, those blink stalkers are a liability. Or like there's a drop coming. Now the Protoss, the stalkers can't be on the map. They have to be on defense. And it's like, it's cool when that shifts back and forth and back and forth. But yeah, like, yeah, it's I don't know how it's gonna go. It's gonna be it'll be fun to see what they come up with and play it. But these are concerns. I think these are legitimate concerns.
Yeah. No, this has been a great talk. It's I love hearing your thoughts on it. We should definitely do it again once they have that third race out, man. I really want to see what the third race is going to be.
Yeah, I guess the next phase is going to be closed beta. It's going to be closed. So
I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah, so like it's going to be a long time before we can talk about it again, because that, I mean, yeah,
we'll just talk about it privately. I'll record it, then we'll just release when we can.
Yeah. But yeah, cool, man. You're gonna queue up some more Brood War games?
Oh, you fucking know it. I got that Brood War brain, as they call it.
Yeah, you do have to. I actually respect so much that you're still grinding out Brood War.
Yeah,
dude, you got how many kids? And it's like, dude, still. It's insane, because you know I've got the 2 kids now, and like I've got all my friends are gamers, and so it's like, to what extent can we keep gaming as we're having kids and all this stuff?
Yeah. Well, the whole trick was making it my job.
Making your job, yeah, for sure.
No matter what my wife says, I get to play for 5 hours a night.
Yeah. That's got to keep the lights on.
That's the dream.
Yeah. Okay, man. Well, good luck in your games tonight.
Thanks. Thanks for the talk. Good talking to you. See you later. Bye-bye.